President Donald Trump in an extraordinary late-night Saturday night press conference, appearing with two members of his cabinet in a tuxedo, because it's a night that began in honor and celebration of the First Amendment and the Constitution, and ended, as too many nights in America these days, and with a conversation about political violence. We don't know the motive of the gunman at this hour, but we do know a man charged a security checkpoint at the Hilton where the White House Correspondents Dinner was taking place. You see the video on your screen. And he was charging toward a room full of journalists, politicians, and the President of the United States. Inside that room, because this has become so common in America, you have people that are multiple-time victims of political violence. Erica Kirk was in the room. People saw her in tears. Steve Scalise was a table away from me. That's the reason I'm wearing a tuxedo here as well. He was a victim of political violence. And then, of course, you have the president himself. That is the context for what we're talking about tonight. And we also know more about the specifics on the gunman himself. Matt, you've been looking into that.
We do have a name right now, Tony. It is Cole Thomas Allen, 31, from Torrance, California, just south of Los Angeles. Our understanding so far is that he has no known criminal record. We don't know much more other than the pictures we are now seeing of him being taken down, hands shackled behind him, zip-tied, face down. We do know that he brought at least two weapons in, a shotgun and a handgun. He was able to fire some of them, as you saw him sprint through that security cordon towards that room that was closed off, sealed, as the president had just said, with many, many hundreds of journalists, VIPs, and politicians inside. We don't have a motive, but we don't exactly know what his target was at this moment.
We don't have a moment. We have the context, and I'll give another note on the context here. There's the pattern of political violence with other politicians for many years now. We've had these conversations, it seems like every other week sometimes. And on the way out, as we were all escorted out, forced down one particular pathway, there are protesters. It is a free speech event. Protest is a free speech right. One of the signs that I saw on the way out said, "Death to tyrants, death to them all." Protected speech, ugly speech, and the kind of speech that can lead a broken mind to charge a security checkpoint like we just saw.
And Tony, I was in the room before this incident happened, talking to a White House official about all the threats that they have been getting. And they were talking about the decision that they were making about whether to move and where to move, because there is this heightened threat environment. You have several top White House officials and cabinet members who are actually living on an army base right now because it was determined that that was the safest place for them to live. We were just on the salad course when this happened. The President of the United States, who just said in that press conference, I was really ready to rip it tonight. He was very excited. This was his first time in either of his terms actually attending the White House Correspondents Association dinner. It was our Ouija Zhang who made that entreaty to him, arguing this was all about the First Amendment, the relationship between the press and the president, urging him to come. He was looking forward to it. He had worked with his joke writers on a speech, and we had multiple officials telling us after this shooting that he wanted to stay and give the speech anyway until the Secret Service told him that he had to leave.
You're seeing video on your screen right now that I shot from my table about 20 yards from where the president was sitting. You heard the president in the press conference praise law enforcement and the Secret Service response. I will say we were all in the room. The pictures that the president posted of the suspect face down on the rug, that is quite close to a set of stairs that goes down to the ballroom itself. It's maybe 100 yards, 150 yards from the entry point into the ballroom and then the ballroom itself. It's not a great distance, so you can't fault his confidence, but I'm sure there will also be a review here of how close he got and why he was able to get so close. You mentioned Ouija Zhang. Our Ed O'Keefe is not far from here across town with Ouija right now. We're going to go to him now. Ed?
Good to see you again. We obviously were all together in that ballroom about, 2 hours ago now when this happened. The rest of us were on the ballroom floor at our tables, and Ouija was up on stage on the dais in her role not only as senior White House correspondent, but as chairwoman of the White House Correspondents Association. For the uninitiated, remind them, what is this association? What were we doing tonight?
The White House Correspondents Association serves as the bridge between the White House press corps and the administration. And once a year, we host this dinner for all of those people in both groups to come together to celebrate the importance of the First Amendment and all the freedoms in the First Amendment. So we were doing that today. This was, in the middle of dinner, and the formal program had not started, but we were all seated. We were, having conversation. I was talking to President Trump because I was sitting there with him, and it was so quick.
Did you hear it?
We heard commotion, and then I saw the Secret Service agents plunging toward our head table, and it took me a couple seconds to realize what was happening. But when I heard them say down, 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 I of course crawled to the ground as quickly as possible, and there was President Trump right in front of me. We were touching because we were both sprawled out on the ground. In front of him was the First Lady, and agents were telling us to move when they thought it was safe. So we crawled out into
You had to crawl off the stage.
Yes, I crawled off the stage, and I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that there was some sort of threat. The president and the First Lady were whisked away, and we were just holding for a while to see if we could find out more details about what was happening. And I will say the president kept in very close touch, and he wanted the show to go on as he posted publicly, but he kept saying, we should go back, because he didn't want to be deterred by any threat. So ultimately, of course, law enforcement decided that was not a good idea, and we came here to the White House.
And we're going to do it again.
The president says that we are going to do it again. In fact, he called me back to have a conversation with him before he posted about it, and he explained that despite the fact that he really wanted this dinner to go on tonight, that it would have to wait, but he stressed multiple times that he wanted to have the dinner at some point because he thought it was important. This is the first time President Trump had ever agreed to come to this dinner as president.
He didn't do it in his first term, and
right.
hadn't so far. Yeah.
Right, and in the briefing just now, you heard him. He said, tonight was supposed to bring the White House and the press together, and in a way this has, because you realize the gravity, and you realize that the one thing we have in common, the one thing is our duty to the American people.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And he was quite reflective about that, I thought.
You've spent months, a year, working on this. This happens. They're asking me to ask you because we're all concerned as colleagues. How are you feeling?
Oh, thank you for asking that. What we do isn't about a big fancy dinner party.
Right.
In some ways, what happened tonight is actually a much better reflection of what it is we do. Because when I looked at my phone, and I didn't go into the ballroom, but I was scrolling, just trying to find out what people were reporting, I saw many reporters reporting live from in the room and tweeting from in the room, and having no idea whether their lives were at stake because they didn't know if there was an ongoing threat. And that's what reporters do. And that was on full display. And why do we do it, even in the most unthinkable circumstances? To inform the public. We're not doing it for ourselves. So.
Tony, and we all ran back here, and we'll be here through the night to sort out what's going on. I know there's some other information being shared up the street, so we should go deal with that, Tony. Thank you, Misha.
Weijia, thank you very much. Ed, thank you very much. That's not where they expected to be tonight. That's not where we expected to be tonight. It's been a very strange turn of events. We are waiting, and we'll go to, when we have it, a police update. It looks like they've begun. Let's listen in.
Brave men and women do each and every day to protect our protectees. It's not easy, and I will tell you that they performed admirably. We got to see what they do, and that individual, when he charged a checkpoint, was apprehended. It shows that our multi-layered protection works, and I'm grateful to our partners that help assist us with building these sites and protecting these sites. Very fortunate that this officer is alive, is being observed, and I'm grateful that the President reached out to this officer and spoke with him earlier. I ask everybody to pray for him and all of our officers and agents that were involved, and I will tell you, we will continue with the mission. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Pirro.
I'm Janine Pirro. I'm the United States Attorney. Right now, the defendant is being charged with 2 counts, 924C, using a firearm during a crime of violence, and a second crime under 111, which is assault on a federal officer using a dangerous weapon. Now, as you all know, there was an individual, a uniformed Secret Service officer, who fortunately, he is doing all right and he will be fine. But it is clear, based upon what we know so far, that this individual was intent on doing as much harm and as much damage as he could. And thankfully, because of the checkpoint right outside the ballroom, where thousands of people were situated to hear the President of the United States, because that checkpoint worked, there was no one who was injured when it was clear where this defendant was going. Now, I want to make one comment. As a participant, someone who was in the ballroom, who came this evening to be part of a very lovely event at the White House Correspondents Dinner, I, for the first time, was in a situation where there were shots fired, shots heard, and a whole room went silent. When I lifted my head, and when I looked up, every law enforcement officer was out there as we all had our heads down, thousands of them. These are the men and women every day who do what they do silently, and they do it with courage and with dignity. Thank God for our partners, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Metropolitan Police. All of them tonight acted so quickly that they prevented what could have been a horrific event where we were all sitting there in one room. The defendant will be arraigned on Monday in federal district court. But make no mistake, there will be many more charges based upon the information that we are learning in this very fluid situation. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. Right here in the front. Right here in the front.
That the suspect is specifically targeting the president, and is he talking to law enforcement now?
Chief.
Sure. So at this point, what we know is we know the individual charged a checkpoint with a firearm in his hand. We know he was running in the direction of the ballroom that the president was in, as well as other cabinet members. So what his specific motivation was, we can't say at this point. However, as we continue to investigate that, we'll continue to work towards that.
Chief, when you say there seems to have been a lack of authorization to come to this event. Was this a failure on the Secret Service?
I mean, what we have here is a multi-layered approach. The director spoke about it. We have officers on the outside from the Metropolitan Police Department along with the escort. The inside portion of any presidential site is handled by the Secret Service and law enforcement partners. This is a multi-layered approach. The point of this checkpoint is to intercept individuals that were there, and what we see in this case is when he reached that checkpoint, Secret Service agents and law enforcement engaged him immediately. They were able to bring him into custody and prevent anyone from being harmed.
Chief Pirro, right here.
Chief Pirro, can you tell us if you found a vehicle associated with the suspect, And are you or the FBI conducting any search warrants either on a vehicle or locations here or elsewhere around the country?
Sure, Mark. So as you can imagine, this is very early in the investigation. So, things we're looking into is his background, vehicles. Those are all things that the FBI, the Metropolitan Police Department, and the Secret Service are working together jointly to determine, is there anything else that's available? So I would imagine as we continue to go through this investigation, there will be additional search warrants and things of that nature as the investigation progresses.
Is this suspect known to law enforcement?
At this point, he was not known to the Metropolitan Police Department, I can tell you that.
Right here.
There are multiple other parties and events happening associated with this weekend tonight. Is there any reason to believe that there will be security concerns at those events? Are there preparations being made locally to protect those attendees?
Yeah, absolutely not. So we have no indication. This is an isolated incident with one individual is the information that we do have. However, we do have additional officers across the city that are giving special attention. We do know there were some after parties and events that are planned that we will be providing coverage for those events.
Yep,
right here. The president said that this is not a particularly secure building. Do you agree with that assessment?
I'm not exactly 100% familiar with this building. I do know in this incident tonight, I know there was a security plan that was developed by the Secret Service that the Metropolitan Police Department assisted with, and I know that security plan did work this evening.
Right here.
Thank you so much. Do you know specifically if President Trump was a target of this attack? And can you speak to the reporting about the suspect assembling a long weapon and to get into the ballroom?
Yes, as we said before, we do know the president was inside the ballroom. We know there was cabinet members and many guests in there. Who specifically he was targeting at this point, that's part of the investigation. We do know that he was armed with a shotgun when he ran through that checkpoint, so that would look like a long weapon in video.
All right, right here.
Can you clarify, earlier you said there was an exchange of gunfire. Did the suspect fire any shots? And did the uniformed officer, do you know yet which weapon he was shot?
Yeah, obviously we're only a couple hours into this instance, so we don't have that level of information. The FBI's evidence response team is here. They're processing the scene. So as the investigation develops, all that information will be figured out with the ballistics. The ATF is also on scene here with us.
So the suspect did or did not fire a shot?
Sure. So again, it's very preliminary information. We do believe he did. However, as the investigation determines, we'll pull the shell casings. We'll be able to get more information as we review more evidence. We're very early in the investigation.
All right, we can take a couple more right here, and one more over here.
Thank you so much. So, the president said that he wants there to be another event within 30 days. Given what happened tonight, do you have any sense of what additional security measures might be put in place to ensure that something similar does not happen again?
Sure. I'll toss it to the Secret Service.
Yep, this is what we plan for every day. So we take each and every case and we evaluate it, and we do site assessments. And that's why we go out and build these sites per what the event is, and that's how we go about our business.
So will there be any changes or added measures given that this did happen?
We're going to have to evaluate this evening.
Thank you.
Chief, is there any indication how the suspect got into the hotel? Was it a guest here? Are you searching rooms?
Sure. So preliminary information, we do believe he was a guest here at the hotel. We have secured a room here in the hotel. And again, we'll go through the appropriate procedures to determine what was inside there. But that is secure. At this point, like I said, we believe he is the only suspect in this case.
Okay.
To jump on that question, I understand the multi-approach to security, but to walk in with a weapon of that caliber and get all the way to the ballroom, which is on the lower level, seems to be quite an extraordinary feat. How does that happen?
Sure. So again, we're very early in the investigation, so we'll have to determine, we'll go through video across the hotel to figure out how the gun got in, how it got down here. Those things will come through the investigation. At this point, we don't have that level of detail.
Okay, last one.
Yes, video appears to show the president falling down and being escorted out. Was he injured at all during his evacuation?
No, we don't have any information that he was injured.
All right. Could you clarify how he was detained? If he was not shot, could you clarify how he was detained?
Sure. So law enforcement right here in this very area, they actually tackled him to the ground and handcuffed him.
And how many people were in the hospital?
Can you give us his name?
Not at this time.
Do we know
we will release his name, Mark, once we have all the information. Again, we're still running a lot of things down.
How many people
in the hospital? So we have the Uniform Division Secret Service officer who's being evaluated at the hospital who took a round to the vest, and the suspect is being evaluated, but he was not struck by gunfire.
Just right here, are you looking at any terrorism charges?
Well, as the chief just indicated, we're very early in this investigation, but make no mistake, if there is anything like that, we will find it and we will file it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You've been listening to an update from law enforcement tonight, a night that began at the White House Correspondents Dinner and ended with this potential act of political violence. A gunman, 31 years old, running with a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives toward a room full of journalists and the President of the United States, along with cabinet members as well. We have charges. We just heard from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro. Assault on a federal officer, one count. And one count of, was it a firearms charge, Matt?
It was intent to commit violence with a weapon.
Intent to commit violence with a weapon. Now, those are preliminary charges to hold him tonight as this investigation continues. They will almost certainly be upgraded from there. I'm also here. What stood out to you?
Well, I think what stands out to me is the fact that this took place at the Washington Hilton, which, for people who don't know, the White House Correspondents' Dinner has taken place at that location for decades. It's right in the middle of D.C. It's also colloquially known as the Hinckley Hilton because 45 years ago there was an attempted assassination outside of the hotel after an event by John Hinckley shooting at Ronald Reagan, the president at the time. And the reason that the dinner takes place there and has for decades is very simple. It is a very large hotel with a very large ballroom. Everyone's seen the pictures by now. There are thousands of people in that room. It's one of the few hotels in the city that can accommodate that many people. And as a result, it is not really logistically feasible, or at least it hasn't been up until this point, to put the mags outside of the hotel and have people go through the mags as they come into the hotel, because you've got lots of guests staying at that hotel who walk in and out as well. And so the mags were set up right outside the ballroom itself, which is what apparently enabled this individual to get so close to the ballroom that people who were sitting in the back actually heard the gunshots. And I want to point out something else, Tony, which is that I was surrounded by a bunch of people who had already been through the shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, the attempted assassination there, and they were sort of plunged right back into that moment. I'm not just talking about journalists, but officials as well, who, as we were cowering under the tables, you could tell that they were experiencing some form of PTSD because that in and of itself was a traumatic event that they were now revisiting.
Yeah, it's a remarkable situation here. We heard the president in an earlier press conference talk about events like this being something that comes with the territory. And we have a list we can just make on the back of an envelope of the number of major political figures and major figures in public life who have faced incidents like this. It's a remarkable fact, I imagine, now we can about our country at this moment in time, that this does come with the territory. Go ahead, Matt.
We have become accustomed at this point to political violence happening with shocking frequency. And I think one of the things that we have seen is that this happens time and again. However, and I think we just heard this in the press conference, what the USS Secret Service Chief Sean Curran described as the multi-layer protection worked. We don't know that President Trump was the target this time, but there were many layers of protection, and as we saw, that alleged assassin, that suspect, did not manage to penetrate even the room. So whatever was there, police, Secret Service, DHS, the system appeared to have been able to catch this assailant before he made it into the room.
And on that point, it's a success. But it's interesting, the president has had a few different messages on the subject of security. On the one hand, thanking the law enforcement for the protective action they took, but on the other hand, saying the room wasn't particularly secure. On the other hand, saying this is why we need the ballroom. So on this question of security, the preliminary and the proactive, let's go to CBS News security contributor Sam Vinograd, who's also with us at another location in the D.C. Bureau. Sam, if you can hear me, take it away.
Certainly, Tony. And when these law enforcement officials reference a multi-layered security posture, what that means is there are various stages of physical security to try to prevent an individual from, the first instance, getting into the facility and then getting closer to the protectees. And that's why the magnetometers were the last line of defense, if you will, before the ballroom. But the security planning for this event starts weeks prior to it actually happening. The U.S. Secret Service is in the lead for the security planning for this event. and does weekly countdown meetings, daily calls with all the various law enforcement agencies that are involved, as well as a private security that's there protecting other individuals present on the site. There are physical security preparations made, as well as a very broad and deep sweep of intelligence information. I will note, if this individual was in fact a lone gunman who was not known to law enforcement, it is more than likely that intelligence just wouldn't have done the trick. And what that brings us to, Tony, is real questions about the screening of individuals that were allowed into the hotel. And what the coordination was like between the hotel and the law enforcement officials present on site. The last thing I'll say is that right now, law enforcement officials at all levels of government are conducting digital, forensic, and visual analysis to try to ascertain this individual's profile, as well as his travel patterns. And that will take some time, likely before we get further information on motive, travel patterns, how long this was planned, and if there were any red flags along the way.